The war in Ukraine has reached a catastrophic point. With the possible re-election of Trump and the threat of cutting American support, President Zelenskyy, contradicting everything he has said in the past, is desperately seeking a peace agreement with Russia. Will Ukraine be forced to concede? And what does this mean for global geopolitics? Watch until the end to understand this serious issue and everything that is happening in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine began in February 2022, when Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, launched a full-scale invasion. The world watched in shock as Russian missiles devastated Ukrainian cities and millions of civilians were forced to flee their homes. This unprecedented aggression, condemned by most nations, was seen as a blatant attempt to resurrect Soviet expansionism, leaving an indelible mark on global geopolitics. Initially, the Western response was marked by hesitation. Faced with Russia's threatening declarations that any assistance to Ukraine would be seen as a provocation, crossing a red line, many countries were reluctant to act. However, as the war intensified and Ukrainian resistance proved steadfast, aid began to flow slowly. Each new shipment of weapons and humanitarian assistance was accompanied by new Russian threats, with new red lines being drawn, until Western support became significant and vital for Ukraine's defense. The leadership of Zelenskyy has been severely tested during this crisis. Initially underestimated by many, the former comedian turned president has shown impressive resilience, galvanizing global support with passionate speeches and a constant presence on the front lines. However, his unwavering stance against any negotiation with Putin, seen as a symbol of resistance, is now being challenged by geopolitical realities. Zelenskyy repeatedly stated that he would not negotiate peace while Putin remained in power, even incorporating this stance into the Ukrainian constitution. However, faced with the threat of a cut in American support, he has backtracked on his words, revealing the complexity and pressure of the situation. Amidst all this, the morality and ethics of the war have become heated points of discussion. While Ukraine is not without its faults, Russia, on the one hand, continues its atrocities and human rights violations. The West, on the other hand, is accused of hypocrisy by expanding eastward through NATO and so-called colour revolutions, condemning Russia's response to these provocations and advances. This war is not just a battle between two nations, but an ideological battlefield that reveals the deep flaws and inherent hypocrisy of the world's powers. With this complex web of events and interests in mind, Ukraine is in a very difficult position. But what are the most recent developments, and how are they shaping the future of this war-torn country? The current situation in Ukraine, as of July 2024, is marked by continuous and devastating fighting on multiple fronts. In the east, battles in Donetsk and Luhansk remain intense, with Russian forces attempting to advance and capture key territories. Ukraine, with the support of Western intelligence and military equipment, has managed to resist and, in some cases, even reclaim small areas previously occupied by the Russians. The war of attrition in these regions highlights the determination of both sides to control these strategic territories. In the south, the fight for control of Kherson remains fierce. This region, vital for its supply routes and access to the Black Sea, has been the scene of intense combat. Ukrainian forces have conducted counter-offensive operations, using precision artillery systems provided by the West to weaken Russian positions and disrupt their supply lines. However, the advances are slow and costly, with both sides suffering significant losses. The human toll is alarming. Recent reports indicate that Russia has lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers since the conflict began, while Ukraine also suffers heavy casualties, including many civilians. The destruction of essential infrastructure, such as hospitals, schools, and power grids, exacerbates the humanitarian crisis in the country. Civilians face forced displacement, lack of basic supplies, and an uncertain future. This devastating scenario underscores the brutality of the war and the immense human cost it imposes. The war is also evolving in terms of military strategy. Russia has intensified the use of heavy artillery and airstrikes, targeting both military objectives and critical civilian infrastructure. In response, Ukraine has adapted its tactics, employing advanced weaponry provided by its Western allies to conduct more effective counter-offensive and defensive operations. This continuous adaptation is vital for Ukrainian resistance, but also increases the complexity and unpredictability of the conflict. With no end to the war in sight, Ukraine faces not only battlefield challenges but also deep internal crises. How is the country coping with the economic, social, and political impacts of this prolonged war? The prolonged war has brought a series of internal challenges to Ukraine, complicating its struggle for survival even further. The country's economy is in shambles. Even before the invasion, Ukraine faced economic difficulties, but now the situation is catastrophic. Essential infrastructure has been devastated by constant bombings, leaving entire cities without access to basic services. The agricultural production capacity, one of the pillars of the Ukrainian economy, has been severely affected, exacerbating the food crisis both domestically and globally. The social impact is also immense. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced from their homes, creating a refugee crisis both within and outside the country. Families have been separated, and the population lives in constant fear and uncertainty. The psychological trauma of the war is deep and long-lasting, affecting both civilians and soldiers. Mental health services are overwhelmed, and the government's ability to provide adequate support is limited by the devastating circumstances. Politically, Ukraine faces significant challenges in maintaining unity and stability. The war has exacerbated internal divisions and increased pressure on Zelenskyy's leadership. Despite his initial popular support, the prolonged duration of the conflict and growing frustration with the lack of progress may lead to discontent and political instability. Furthermore, corruption, a chronic problem in Ukraine, continues to undermine efforts at reconstruction and effective governance. Education and public health are also in crisis. With schools destroyed and educational infrastructure severely damaged, millions of children lack access to proper education, compromising the country's future. The healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, unable to cope with the increased demand caused by the war. The lack of medical resources and the destruction of hospitals and clinics further aggravate the situation. If you are still watching, it means you are enjoying the content, so please subscribe to the channel. It takes less than a second for you, but it makes a huge difference for me. Help the channel continue to exist and post more geopolitical analyses like this. Now, back to the video. While Ukraine deals with these devastating internal challenges, a new factor could drastically change the course of the war: the potential election of Donald Trump in the United States. How could this possible change in leadership impact Ukraine's future and its international support? The possible re-election of Donald Trump brings with it a wave of uncertainties and fears for Ukraine. Trump has repeatedly stated that he would cut military support to Ukraine, leaving the country extremely vulnerable to Russian aggression. This stance threatens not only Ukraine's territorial integrity, but also the stability of the entire region. Ukraine, which heavily relies on Western support to resist the invasion, may be forced to seek unfavorable agreements with Russia if this aid is cut off. Moreover, Trump has made alarming statements about encouraging Russia to invade NATO countries that do not meet their minimum investment obligations in the organization. This rhetoric not only weakens the world's most powerful defensive alliance, but also encourages Russian aggression. The prospect of a less committed America to European defense sends dangerous signals to Moscow, potentially further destabilizing the already fragile security on the continent. For Russia, Trump's re-election would be a geopolitical boon. During his first term, Trump often adopted a lenient stance towards Russia and Vladimir Putin. On several occasions, Trump praised Putin's leadership, calling him strong and very smart. Additionally, Trump cast doubt on Russia's interference in the 2016 US elections, despite conclusions from US intelligence agencies that Russia interfered to favor his candidacy. Trump downplayed these findings and, in a meeting with Putin in Helsinki in 2018, even said he saw no reason for Russia to have interfered, contradicting his own intelligence agencies. This stance aligned with Russian objectives to weaken the Western alliance. A second Trump term could mean less American resistance to Russia's territorial ambitions, offering Putin an opportunity to consolidate gains and possibly expand his sphere of influence further. Recently, Trump's popularity has surged significantly after an assassination attempt on his life last weekend. This dramatic event generated a wave of solidarity among his supporters and galvanized his electoral base. Trump's response to the attack, promising to be even firmer in his policies, boosted his position in the polls, creating an even more worrying scenario for Ukraine. Trump also declared that he would force Ukraine to negotiate with Russia to end the war. This position reflects his transactional and pragmatic approach, but ignores the complexities and horrors of the conflict. Forcing Ukraine to concede under pressure could mean giving up vital territories and legitimizing Russian aggression, further weakening Ukraine's position and encouraging future Russian aggressions. With this threat of a drastic shift in American policy, how are Ukraine's international allies reacting? International support for Ukraine has been a fundamental pillar in resisting Russian aggression. Countries like France, Germany, Poland, and the United Kingdom have played critical roles, providing arms, training, and logistical support, as well as humanitarian and economic assistance. However, this support is not uniform and reveals deep divisions within Europe. France and Germany, for instance, have often adopted more cautious and diplomatic approaches, emphasizing the need for negotiations and peaceful solutions. In contrast, Poland and the United Kingdom have been more assertive, advocating for increased arms supplies and a tougher stance against Moscow. These internal European divisions further complicate the situation for Ukraine. The lack of a united front weakens the effectiveness of aid and sends mixed signals to both Kiev and Moscow. Hungary, under the leadership of President Viktor Orbán, exemplifies this disunity. Orbán has maintained a pro-Russia stance, frequently criticizing sanctions against Moscow and expressing skepticism about the effectiveness of military support for Ukraine. This position not only undermines the collective efforts of the European Union, but also provides Putin with an opportunity to exploit these fissures, weakening the coalition supporting Ukraine and prolonging the conflict. Diplomacy, although crucial, is fraught with challenges. Efforts to mediate peace and achieve a ceasefire have been complicated by mutual distrust and conflicting objectives of the parties involved. Ukraine seeks robust security guarantees and the recovery of its territories, while Russia wants recognition of its annexations and the lifting of sanctions. The European Union and other international mediators, such as the UN, face the difficult task of balancing these demands while trying to prevent further escalation of the conflict. Effective diplomacy requires not only negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow, but also the harmonization of divergent positions within Europe itself. Meanwhile, plans to continue supporting Ukraine are being developed, especially considering the possibility of a reduction or end of American aid. European countries are discussing ways to increase their financial and military assistance, aiming to minimize the impact of a potential US withdrawal. However, the issue of Ukraine's membership in NATO remains controversial. Although Ukraine desires this additional protection, its entry into the defensive bloc is viewed skeptically by many alliance members who fear a direct escalation of the conflict with Russia. This is unlikely to happen soon unless there is a significant transformation in the conflict and global geopolitics that justifies Ukraine's inclusion in the organization. This strategic dilemma continues to be a point of tension in international diplomatic discussions. With these complex dynamics of international support and diplomacy, what preparations is Ukraine making for possible peace negotiations? Amid growing international pressure and intensifying conflict, President Zelenskyy is planning a new peace summit. This time, he proposes the inclusion of Russians in the negotiations, marking a significant shift in his previous stance. Zelenskyy, who previously refused to negotiate directly with Putin, now recognizes the need for a more inclusive approach to achieve a lasting resolution. This peace summit aims to bring together all interested parties, including international mediators who can facilitate constructive dialogue. The role of strategic countries like Brazil, Turkey, India, and China in the peace negotiations is crucial. Turkey, under the leadership of Erdogan, has acted as an active mediator, organizing meetings between Russian and Ukrainian representatives. Erdogan has a complex relationship with both sides and has previously mediated agreements on prisoner exchanges and grain exports. His pragmatic approach and desire to increase Turkish influence in the region position him as an essential mediator. India, led by Narendra Modi, maintains a neutral stance, seeking to balance its relations with both Russia and the West. India has a long history of non-alignment and seeks diplomatic solutions that can be acceptable to all parties involved. India's position as an emerging power also gives it significant weight in the negotiations, enabling it to influence discussions in an impartial and pragmatic manner. Brazil, under the leadership of Lula, and with its active diplomacy, seeks a more robust mediating role on the international stage. Despite its commercial relations with Russia, Brazil tries to maintain a neutral stance, proposing peaceful solutions that consider humanitarian and security needs. Brazil's strategic position as a regional leader in Latin America can bring a unique perspective to the negotiations, although its impact depends on its ability to navigate the conflicting interests of the involved powers. China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, has a close strategic and economic relationship with Russia. However, Chinese interests are complex, as Beijing also benefits from Russia's weakening due to the war and Western sanctions, which allows China to strengthen its influence in Asia. China has been accused by the West of indirectly financing the war by selling resources and technology to Russia. In response, Beijing has vehemently denied these accusations, stating that its actions comply with international trade norms and that it seeks only to promote regional stability. Putin has shown interest in having Lula and Xi Jinping as principal mediators. The choice of Lula is based on the perception that he can provide a global South perspective, offering a view not seen as aligned with Western interests. Xi Jinping, with China being a strategic and economic ally of Russia, can ensure that Russian interests are fairly represented. Putin believes these leaders can offer more reliable guarantees and a negotiation platform not perceived as biased by the West. The preparation for this peace summit involves complex preliminary negotiations where every detail is crucial. The selection of mediators, the discussion agenda, and security guarantees for both parties are delicate topics that need careful handling. Ukraine, in particular, seeks firm security guarantees and the recovery of its territories, while Russia wants recognition of its annexations and the lifting of sanctions. The success of this summit will depend on the mediators' ability to balance these conflicting demands and find common ground that allows the negotiations to progress. The war in Ukraine has revealed the complexities and contradictions of international relations. Zelensky's determination to seek peace negotiations, despite his previous declarations, underscores the gravity of the situation. The possible re-election of Trump, with his isolationist stance and sympathy for Putin, heightens the uncertainties for Ukraine and its allies. The West's hypocrisy, which expanded eastward through NATO and now condemns Russia's response, highlights the moral complexity of this conflict and the dilemma faced by global powers. Efforts to mediate peace involving countries like Brazil, Turkey, India, and China are crucial but do not guarantee an easy solution. The motivations of these mediators are diverse and often conflicting, reflecting complex geopolitical interests. Ukraine continues to fight for its survival and territorial integrity in an unstable and unpredictable geopolitical environment. The need for a balanced and diplomatic solution is urgent, but the challenges are immense and peace remains uncertain. The future of Ukraine and global stability depend on the next steps of these delicate negotiations. What is your opinion on the matter? Do you think Ukraine should cede the conquered territories to Russia, or is it better for the country to continue fighting, regardless of American support? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like and subscribe to the What is Happening channel. Be sure to check out one of these two videos appearing on the screen now. Thank you for your support and see you next time.